Well, I will go ahead and start my introductory remarks as people are continuing to filter in. So welcome to the UXPA International webinar for July 17th. This is being recorded if you did not see the red recording thing. And we will process it and have it hosted on our website in about a week or so. But before we get to that, I'm happy to introduce Paul McInerney and Livia Asunsao, both from CIBC, both UX researchers, and I will let them talk about any of their other specific backgrounds they want to mention. Otherwise, we can jump right in. I will be keeping an eye on the chat. Attendees, you should be able to type in the chat, and we want to keep this somewhat interactive, so I'll try to monitor it and feed our presenters any comments or questions as they come up. With that, I will turn it over to Paul and Livia.
Well, thank you, Joshua. So this webinar consists of 4 short presentations that will provide some food for thought for everyone, whether you're a UX researcher, a designer, or both. In the first half, I'll cover the first 3 topics on the agenda, and then I'll turn things over to my co-presenter, Livia, to cover the last topic. We won't be having a traditional Q&A. Instead, what we're hoping is that we can hear from some of the people on the call who can build on what we've presented by sharing your own point of view experience. And you can do this by, as the talk goes on or towards the end of a section, just typing your contributions in the chat. And then when I've gone through, after I've finished a section, I'll go through the chat and try to respond to as many comments as I can. As well, after the official end of the event, certainly myself and Livia are happy to stick around. So if other people want to stick around and chat about this presentation or anything else, and hope some of you will do that. Okay, so it's summertime, so let's start with some books that you might want to read on the beach. So welcome to yet another Best UX Books list, but with a twist. This compilation revisits some of the best books from the 1980s. So if you joined the UX field later, you'll get a taste of the latest, greatest ideas from that era and see which ones are still around. So of course, the term UX had not been yet coined, and the field is more commonly known by the terms like human-computer interaction and user-centered design. And these are terms featured in some of the titles that we'll cover. The first category is timeless classics. Books in this category are still being read today with only minor updates. So these titles may seem familiar to some of you. The Visual Display of Quantitative Information by Edward Tufte was published in 1983, and it covers what is today known as data viz. While the author was not specifically addressing the digital medium, this book had a significant impact on the people in the field at the time. This book fused functional communication principles with the pursuit of aesthetic goals. As one reviewer put it, this book is both a masterpiece about design and a masterpiece of design. The Psychology of Everyday Things by Donald Norman was published in 1988. It was a bestseller that introduced usability and user-centered design to the general public. You might recognize the author's name. He remains a thought leader today. And his name appears in some of the other books on this list. If the title seems a bit off, it's because the book was republished with its more familiar title, The Design of Everyday Things. This book is still reaching new audiences. Even my teenage son knows about this book, albeit from a YouTube video. Classics in this next category were first of a kinds that evolved through several editions to the present day, and they provided a template for later authors. Designing the User Interface by Ben Schneiderman was published in 1987. This was the first widely used textbook in the field, and is still going strong. The 6th edition was published in 2016. Human Interface Guidelines, the Apple Desktop Interface, was published by Apple Computer in 1987. It was the first OSUI style guide, and it provided the template for the many style guides that followed, which evolved into today's design systems. Apple has been updating this content for over 30 years, and traces of the original edition are still apparent. Classics in this final category had a major impact in their day and illustrate different ways that the field's pioneers sought to document the rapidly evolving state of the art. If you were a UX expert in the 1980s, you joined working groups, traveled to symposia, and generally had a good time comparing notes with your peers. And afterwards, you'd publish a book to let everyone else know what you talked about. These efforts often tried to cover the entire field, unlike today's more specialized efforts. One notable result is user-centered design, system design, new perspectives on human-computer interaction. This proceedings includes 22 chapters, some of which have amusing titles like "There's More to Interaction Than Meets the Eye," some issues with manual input, and "Answers First, Then Questions." The editors point out this book is not a how-to guide, but rather essays intended to formulate new ways of thinking about the field. The 1980s witnessed some heroic efforts to capture everything worth knowing about the field. One effort was the Handbook of Human-Computer Interaction, with 52 chapters and over 1,100 pages. This publication has since been updated and is even longer. The final type of book we'll look at tried to provide painstaking prescriptive guidance on every design detail. These books were a response to the situation that many UIs were being designed by developers, people with sometimes neither the training nor inclination to deliver a great user experience. So guidance had to be spelled out in excruciating detail. Here's two notable examples. The first is the Handbook of Screen Format Design, published in 1985, and the Handbook, the Human-Computer Interface Design Guidelines, published in 1988. So that wraps up my picks for classic books from the 1980s. In the 1980s, people were busy writing and reading books on UX. However, today, books compete for attention in a more crowded media landscape. In fact, I have a good authority, and that would be my teenage son, that nobody under 30 reads books anymore. Be that as it may, if you ever feel like reading a good UX book, consider one of these classics from the 1980s. So with that, I'd love to just take a few moments and see if people want to share any thoughts on these books in particular, or just the more general topic. So let me just look through the
I was
through
spamming the
the chat.
chat with some of the links to the books, but attendees, I'm done spamming. Please go ahead and type in your thoughts. Have you read some of these books?
Yeah.
Are there things you're particularly curious about? I will say for the last couple, the Handbook of Screen Format Design and the Interface Design Guidelines, I think I would argue that we're kind of back to needing those because software engineering will pretty much do whatever they want unless you are extremely specific.
Yeah. Yeah. And just on the subject, I think there's a, there's a place for some of that. Like I recently was involved in a project where we had to do a very detailed guideline review of a design, and some of the younger people on the team just had no familiarity with either guidelines or how to write good guidelines or how to evaluate a design using guidelines. So there's some I think there's something there that could be we could go back to and learn from. All right, I don't see any other comments there, but certainly if people have more comments, please add them to the chat. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so the next topic is about user strategies and how to address them in UX research and design. So let's start with an example based on something I read a few years ago. We'll analyze some strategies used by air traffic controllers. First, we'll start by defining a goal to analyze. So the goal we analyze is, as an air traffic controller, I want to land planes safely and efficiently. So our task here today is to try to analyze those strategies to achieve that goal. The first step is to identify each method that can be used to achieve the goal. In the study I read, they described 3 methods. The first was to optimize the landing path for each aircraft. The second was to assign the same landing path to all aircraft. And the third was to create weighting buffers. Next, we describe the output that result from using each of these methods. And each method results in a different, an output of different quality. So, high quality, medium quality, and low quality. Finally, we describe the selection criteria. That is, why and when would an air traffic controller choose each method? If you look at the criteria, you'll notice a pattern. So as the work volume increases, the controller chooses a less effortful method, which results in a lower quality output. This pattern is known by the overall strategy called load shedding. And this strategy is common in different domains. I imagine you'd recognize that you use this strategy yourself in various contexts. Now that you have the general idea, I'll explain user strategy analysis in a more rigorous manner. Here's a simple way to represent a task. We start by identifying a user goal, then we list the steps that lead to the goal, and finally we describe the result. So for example, a goal could be invest savings. The steps to achieve that are to identify some investment options, compare the options, select the best investment option, and then actually invest the savings in that option. And as a result, our goal is achieved, namely the savings have been invested. Now, what's missing from this analysis is any notion of user strategy. This representation is very procedural and deterministic. So here's a more sophisticated way to analyze a task that incorporates user strategy. As before, we start with the user goal, but now we identify all the methods for pursuing that goal. Each method has its own set of steps, and not every method is going to produce exactly the same output. So instead of one output, we have multiple flavors of outputs that each describe that each achieve the goal in a somewhat different way. So when someone chooses a method to pursue a goal, they're also choosing the flavor of output that they're going to achieve. Now, different people will take different paths. So one example is highlighted in blue. This person with goal A has chosen method 2, which results in them achieving output B. But our analysis is still missing something. We need to represent how people choose one method over another. So selection criteria describe why one person would choose method 1, but another person might choose method 2. These selection criteria can be represented in different ways, such as in a flow chart or just a simple list of criteria. So to summarize, user strategy analysis is simply the collective term for describing the methods, outputs, and selection criteria for achieving a goal. To analyze strategies for achieving a given goal, you describe the method for achieving the goal, and then for each method, you describe the output and then the selection criteria for choosing a method. I hope you can see the value of this approach. Next, I'll cover some practical guidance for succeeding with strategy analysis. So first, there's different ways that strategies can be defined. Sometimes it's best to describe general styles, such as defensive or offensive strategy. Other times, it's best to describe the strategy by the method. For example, as an air traffic controller, one method is to optimize the path for each aircraft, while another method is to use the same path for each aircraft. Next, being familiar with all the possible manifestations of user strategies will help you recognize and analyze user strategies in a given situation. So strategies can be found at different scales. So at the largest scale, we can find strategies that are found in particular environments and groups. So for example, if you look at air traffic controllers in large airports, you may find a different profile of strategies than people in small airports. We can also see strategies at the level of individuals. If you compare novices and experts, you may see different strategies being used. And at the smallest scale, you can see strategies that appear in short-term situations. So if you happen to be observing work in a situation of low work volume, you may see one strategy, but later during peak volume, you might see a different strategy. When trying to determine why a particular person chooses a particular strategy, we should consider both personal factors like their values and situational factors like workload. The final point is addressed to designers. So if you're provided with descriptions of multiple user strategies, how might you address them in design? So I think there's really three options to consider. The first is to pick one strategy and optimize the design for that particular strategy. A second option is to pick multiple strategies and provide design elements optimized for each of those strategies. And the final design approach is to create a very general and flexible design that'll support a range of user strategies. So here's a summary of what we covered. I first described user strategy analysis, then looked at how to understand user strategies, and finally looked at some options for designing in light of user strategies. So now I'd love to hear any thoughts that people might have about these points, or on, in particular, the general topic of analyzing and supporting different user strategies. So let me look through the chat to see if there's anything there. Ooh, where's my chat window?
Yeah, attendees, please do, give your reactions to the user strategy analysis. It's a more rigorous and formalistic approach than probably a lot of places take. We did have a question come in actually related back to the books. So Kate
Yeah,
asked,
maybe I'll just.
if you think the content might be too much, particularly for immature organizations, and where would you kind of recommend that we start in these less mature organizations?
Yeah, I wouldn't. With the exception of sort of the design of everyday things, I think that's a common. When people look for like what's a good starter book, that's one that's commonly recommended. Yeah, a lot of the other books are, for people who just want to go very, very deep and certainly get a historical perspective on things. I would, I'm not. It was a somewhat. My recommendation was somewhat facetious. I'm not expecting people to run out and read the Handbook of Human-Computer Interaction, but I think there, if you did do that, I'd love to hear your experience, and I think there are things to learn there. And yeah, what do you think? Informal action learns. Yeah, I do. I have participated in book clubs from time to time, but I'm sort of hot and cold on them because the thing that annoys me is most people don't read the book; they just come there and they just talk about whatever. Without, which is I've learned to I've learned that's just how it is. So now I've joined them. I don't read the book either, and I just go and have a very enjoyable time, but not really getting too much value from the actual book that we're supposed to have read.
I would agree that it runs hot and cold. I've had some success in the past with a pretty formal book club with, I actually made slides and notes for each chapter, sort of on the assumption that people wouldn't have read the book, but then at least they could, first 15 minutes of the meeting say, here's what you would have learned if you did read the book.
Yeah.
To try and drive the discussion specifically to that book. However, there's value also if people just want to show up and talk about general topic X, whether it's UX or is or whatever.
Yeah. I think I guess the reality is some mix of those. Yeah, like I say, there's some. The book is the discussion is sort of nominally around the book, especially if some people have read it, then they can chime in about the book. I was actually in a very cool book discussion a while ago. We were reading one book, and the person read the book, but they'd also read another book on the topic, and they were able to bring in, well, this other book said this and that. So it was super interesting that he was able to provide a different perspective on the topic than the book we were looking at by this other book he'd read. So that was sort of the other side of it.
Yeah, get your college seminar style, competing experts.
That's right.
That's how we learn often.
Good. I'm happy to hear that Bill Schmidt is here and contributing. What is he saying here? Dynamic, yes. So strategies, maybe I didn't mention that, but I think I used the term short-term strategy. So I guess that's another term would be dynamic. Is just as the situation evolves, you sort of switch your strategies, and you have the right strategy for the right thing. Yeah. So yeah. And I guess your point too is the actual, maybe the design. The design could be dynamic, where the design is configured for either it knows or that it's a low sort of workload environment. So it's the design is configured a certain way, but then the design can switch to the high workload mode if necessary. Yeah, that's a great point. Good. Well, thanks for that. Hope to hear more from Bill later. Let me just find my screen here. Where did I go? All right. How's our time? Time's pretty good. Okay. Yeah. For finally, just a very quick note on sharing some tips from the philosophy of science relevant to UX research. So here's the overview. Here's the overview of this topic in the form of a logical argument. So my argument has three premises. So I'm sure many of us have heard the commonplace that UX research value proposition is that it provides the why to explain observations such as usability issues or user attitudes. The gold standard for explanation quality is scientific reasoning, and then UX research is like scientific reasoning in some respects. So the conclusion from this argument is that UXR can learn lessons from scientific reasoning about providing high quality explanations. So scientific explanations have the structure of an argument. That is, scientific explanations can be structured as a list of premises that support a conclusion. Now, what's special about a scientific argument is that it contains two types of premises. It contains a general law, or in UXR, some established claim from our body of knowledge. And it includes something called a particular fact, which would be something you've observed in a study. From those premises, the conclusion is a phenomenon to be explained. So here's an example. So the example is, why did the plant on my desk die? So the premises are there's a general law that says plants require sunlight. And the particular fact is that the plant on my desk did not get sunlight. And the conclusion is my plant died. So in many cases, to explain a phenomenon is to state what caused it. So what we want to say is that the lack of sunlight caused my plant to die. The complete form of an argument also includes auxiliary premises. So auxiliary premises are statements that we take for granted and assume to be true. In our example, for the causal explanation to be true, it must be the case that the plant did not die for other reasons, such as lack of water or disease. And the thing we're talking about is an actual plant. It's not a plastic plant, and so on. And another name for auxiliary premises is assumptions. So looking at auxiliary premises more closely, we can see there's actually two types of them. The first type rules out an alternative explanation. So if we want to argue that a plant died from a lack of sunlight, we must show that it didn't die for other reasons like lack of water or disease. The second type of auxiliary premise states things that are implied by the main premise. So for example, it's kind of implied that the plant's an actual plant and the plant is actually dead and it's not just sleeping. Oops. So far, we've been focusing on explaining one type of phenomenon, but science explains other things as well. Our example explains why a particular observation occurred, but we might also want to explain the general pattern. That is, why do plants die if they do not get general sunlight? Another type of explanation explains what something is. So for example, we might want to know, what type of plant is this plant, or what are categories of plants regarding their need for sunlight? Most observations can be accounted for by multiple competing explanations, and the goal is to identify the best explanation. This raises the question of how do we determine which explanation is the best? So here's some commonly cited attributes. The best explanation accounts for most observations. It's the best at generating new predictions. It's the simplest, and it's the most consistent with explanations of related phenomenon. Unfortunately, usually no explanation scores the best in all of these attributes. So there's an element of a judgment in defining what is the best explanation. And informed people can differ in which explanation they support. To wrap up, I'll demonstrate an application to UX research. So suppose we observe that financial advisors like meeting clients. I'll demonstrate the approach by explaining the anyway. Yeah. So So we've observed a couple things. So first, they like meeting clients, but then they dislike the associated record keeping work. But I'll just focus on the first one and look at that one in more detail. So using that logical form, we start with our conclusion, which is that financial advisors like spending time with clients. And then we're going to work backwards to identify the premises that would have to be true to support that conclusion. So what we need is at least one established, generally established fact and a particular fact. So using our professional sense-making capabilities and body of knowledge, we can generate the following premises. I think it's fairly well known that client service reps like spending time with their clients. And we can use the fact that we can think of financial advisors as being one type of financial service rep. And so if those premises are true, then it kind of explains why it is that financial advisors like spending time with their clients. Yeah, and here, so the other, maybe I'll time for the other one as well. So for the second finding, there's the observation that they, what I've done here. So the first part is sort of the explanation in the form of a large logical argument, which of course we don't present in a UX research context. What we do more is we do the thing on the bottom is we report an observation, which is, we've observed that financial advisors like spending time with their clients, and then we provide the why. So we would say that we can think of financial advisors as a type of client service rep, and these type of people are generally known to like spending time with their clients. So to summarize then, UX research provides the why to explain observations such as usability issues, and there's different things that can be explained. We might want to explain, why something happened or why it was observed or what it is. And we can also explain, a very particular observation. We observe this particular person doing this particular thing, or we might want to explain a general pattern. Why do these kind of people, do this kind of thing? And the explanation takes the form of a logical argument with premises, and those premises need to reference established fact from our body of knowledge and then rule out some competing explanations. So I'll end with some topics for discussion and reflection. So I would say, just because we know how to provide an explanation doesn't mean we should always provide one in our UX research reports. So I guess kind of a rhetorical or question I would pose, and maybe people could chime in on in the chat, which is, once we report what we've observed, like how much incremental value is there in providing like the supporting explanation for why that was the case? And if we are going to provide an explanation, like what's the right amount of detail? Is there such a thing as providing too much detail in the explanation? And then the final point is the approach I mentioned is kind of takes as a premise that our field has some quote unquote general laws or established knowledge that we can draw upon. So like to what extent is that true? Obviously, if a field doesn't have any general laws or established explanations, it can be sort of considered a scientific explanation. All right, so let me go find the chat.
We were having some fun a little earlier, I was curious about people's educational background as it relates to this kind of philosophy of science, and there's actually a couple of people with philosophy background here, which is delightful to me. So I'm not the only one. Library science, of course, also a very strong pathway into UX, and indeed my master's degree from Kent State is officially from the School of Information, which is the library science school. Um, so yeah,
Good,
I'd love
great.
if other people would put in the chat, yes, of course we all studied UX at some level, but what else did you study? That's always
Yeah,
a
yeah.
fun one.
Livia, I didn't know you studied philosophy of science. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah. My master's was in history and philosophy of biology,
Yeah,
more specifically, because I have
yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
undergrad in biology and more specifically into a derivation of natural selection theory, which is called group selection. So if you guys are interested, we can have a long
There we
conversation
go.
about that.
All right. Well, maybe after the main presentation is fantastic. Good. Let me just comment for the yeah. Yeah. So yeah, just to end, I'll turn it over to Livy and just say, yeah. So like we often say, we provide the why behind sort of the what, and so it's just a little thinking about like how do we do that, and how is there such a thing as too much? All right. With that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Olivia to cover the last topic.
Sure. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully you can see it. Okay, great. Thank you, Joshua. Okay, and hi everyone. I am Livia. I am a UX researcher at CIBC here in Toronto, same team as Paul. And today I'll be wrapping up the UX mixtape presentation with a discussion about 3 types of study goals. But before we dive into the specifics of study goals, I think it's crucial for us to understand the broader context in which they exist, right? So study goals are one piece of what we call a study plan, which serves as the foundation of any research investigation for design projects. A useful study plan will outline different steps that will map to a conceptual planning task in answering the lack of information in which the project team is interested in solving for. So we have a lot of uncertainties. We're there to kind of provide that information and to lessen that level of uncertainty for the project team. So each study plan will have a project background section in which the scope of the project is outlined, as well as any unfamiliar concepts or facts needed to complete the study. With a project background outlined, it's possible to clearly identify the study goals that will define the questions the study is intended to answer. Then the methodology section specifies the method and high-level study design, which will then address the previous section, which are the study goals. And finally, a project plan that will specify the roles and tasks and timelines to address the prior section, which is the methodology. So the study goals then will provide a clear direction and clear purpose, ensuring that all research activities are aligned with the project objectives, not only answering the right questions, but also what type of methods we'll use and what type of timelines we'll provide to answer those questions. So the study goals here will help the researcher prioritize the efforts to answer what is most important and impactful for the project, allowing the project team to make evidence-based decisions. Therefore, I think it's safe to say that the study goals are the linchpin of the study plan. Without well-defined study goals, the research then risks prioritizing questions that are not relevant, and of course, consequently, will not help the project team to clarify uncertainties when making these tricky and risky design decisions. But it's important to clarify that the study plan, including, of course, one of the sections, which is the study goals, so crafting all of that, this is a collaborative effort between the researchers and the project team that could involve designers, developers, POs, PMs, and other roles. However, we think this collaboration, which is very, very important as outlined in Erica Hall's book, Just Enough Research There, is it always easy or is it always simple to make sense of all the different requests or the different questions that we researchers receive? Well, this is usually how we enter a kickoff meeting with a project team. So we have a wide range of questions, such as who are our target users, or you know, are our target users going to need our design solution? Are they going to use it? Do they need it? Do they want it? Or sometimes it's even to evaluate if they can effectively use the design solution. However, any legit UXR question falls into these three categories. One is understand users. Second category would be to compare multiple designs. And the third category is to evaluate a single design. So all the questions listed on an earlier slide here in this presentation that I showed with all the questions that we enter in a kickoff meeting, they fit in one of our three types of study questions. For instance, if we are aiming to understand who are our target users, their needs, their behaviors, their attitudes, their expectations, or even what will make them, encourage them use our design, these are all study questions that fall into the understand users category. But if you're interested in comparing multiple design options to serve a target audience, then it will fall into the compare designs category. And finally, if you're aiming to evaluate the usability of a design or ways to improve that usability of that design, this question will fall under the evaluate a single design category. And one reason we can say with confidence that all study questions in UX research can map to exactly one of these categories, which is type of a taxonomy here, is that each study question involves a different number of designs. For example, understanding users. This type of question doesn't require a design, but the compare multiple designs type of questions requires 2 or more designs. Of course, you're comparing, right? And of course, they evaluate a single design type of study question requires a single design to be examined in the study. Another characteristic of this framework is that it usually follows a logical sequence, usually. So first, you understand users, then you can compare multiple design options considered as a solution for those for that target audience. And once you pick the best design, you can evaluate it and further refine it. But if you examine this framework closely, you'll notice that it actually maps to the phases of software development cycle, in which first you define the problem, then you explore multiple design options to, solve that problem. And finally, you refine the selected design option. And let's go into the main cases for using this framework. So I would say that the main case for using this framework is that they can be very useful for conducting a study, actually conducting and planning it actually. So recognizing the broad type of goals, your study goals can help guide various parts of the study. For example, if the goal is to compare multiple designs, and here I'm going to be comparing these 2 different types of study questions, so compare and evaluate. So if you have the compare type of study, you can, when you're planning the study plan, crafting the study plan with your stakeholders, you can probe them with specific questions. So which designs to compare, for example, and what aspects to compare them on. Whereas if you aim to evaluate a single design, you can probe stakeholders with different type of questions. So you can understand what aspects of the design will be evaluated, which design elements we're going to evaluate. So the rationale is the same with simple questions for your participants, and even if you're reporting your research findings. So for the compare type of question, you can ask your participants, which design do you find most appealing, for example, and why? Whereas if you're evaluating a single design, you can use a different type of question for your participants. So you can ask them to rate their satisfaction, for example, with the design. When it comes to reporting your results, recognizing the type of question will prepare you to kind of frame your research report, right? And focus on what is important based on your type of question. So if you're comparing, you could then report a comparison of the pros and cons of each design. And if you're evaluating a single design, you could, for example, report the positive and negative feedback on the design based on the user's responses. Another point of clarification here, actually, for using the framework is that it can help with not only planning, like crafting the study plan, but crafting the study goals in your study plan. So if you identify that your study, for example, involves the understand users type of question, you can use the guidance of describing what you want to learn about your users. Or if you want to compare, you should describe the design options being compared and the main areas of concern that you compare that with. Lastly, if you want to evaluate a single design, you can identify the main areas of concern for that evaluation, if it's about findability, if it's about, for example, focusing on the copy. Now, when it comes to the wording of the study goals, this is usually a question that many researchers have to make it less broad and very specific. So using this type of taxonomy could also help in that way as well. If your goal is to understand users, then of course we would suggest that you use the verb understand users. Understand, or it could be elicit information about your users, or validate an assumption about your users, or even enhance the understanding that you have about your target users. If you're comparing multiple designs, then obviously the main verb here to use is compare. So you can compare A, B, C options, or you can compare the pros and cons of each option. Or you could even use identify the best option if that's the case for your project. Then if you're evaluating a single design, you could start your study goal with evaluate or obtain user feedback about a design or assess the usability of a design, for example. And next here, I should clarify that a study, I showed the different types of questions, but I wanted to clarify that a study can address multiple types of study questions. In this example here, I laid out how a research request can look like for us researchers. So usually the project team has a very specific problem to solve. So in this case, we have 80% of users that are dropping off at a specific point in a conversion funnel. And the requests from the project team sometimes look like this. So we have this problem. Our designers have prototyped some UI changes. Step number 2 specifically of that conversion funnel. Which option should we use? So tell me, go test, tell me which option I should move forward. What we see, though, after considering the request more thoroughly, is that this one question actually encompasses 2 types of study questions. And again, taking into consideration the framework I'm presenting today. So what users, so the two things that encompass in this main question from the project team is that what are users' main expectations, for example, when they're entering the conversion funnel? And secondly, which design would perform better for me when it comes to, making that conversion funnel more optimal, more effective? And as we can see, the distinction, this distinction between the 2 questions reflects the different types of study questions we delineated today. One is about understanding our users and their expectations when going to the funnel, conversion funnel. And the other one is about comparing the multiple design options. However, this is not the only example of multiple types of questions in a single study. The example of the previous slide showed an example where we first understand attitudes from users or expectations or current practices regarding some user activity of interest, in that case, a conversion funnel. And then we compare multiple design options, but we could also compare multiple designs. And then once we pick the best solution, we evaluate it for further refinement. Or we could evaluate a single design for a very specific context, and then evaluate it for another context of use. And another example is evaluating a design on their overall usability, but also evaluating it for specific aspects, such as findability, discoverability, or copy, being very specific. So in conclusion, the study goals, they act as this glue in our research planning, as the linchpin of our research. When crafted collaboratively with multiple project team members, it defines the most important questions that the investigation is intended to answer, addressing both user needs, but also critical business needs. And by classifying the study goals into this taxonomy that we presented today between understanding users, comparing multiple designs, and evaluating a single design, we ensure that the craft of the different parts of the study planning, like probing stakeholders, crafting the study goals, and even reporting the results, are more easily and more effectively made. And with that, I would conclude our UX mixtape presentation, but I'll now open for any questions, any comments about this presentation, this last presentation.
Thank you very much. Bill had a question. He wanted you to expand a bit on the goals of the plan and whether you'd approach it differently. Are you seeking approval? Are you building consensus? Are you just organizing your own thoughts? How does that change your approach to the goals?
So first, Bill asked if I could expand a little bit on the goals of a plan, right? So the study plan will be really that document where basically we're documenting what has been discussed between the researchers and the project team. So are we aligned in terms of what is the scope of the project? Are we aligned on the goals of the investigation? So this is what I'm going to find out using different methods. And then in the plan as well, we have we are aligning what type of methodology we'll be using. And usually the methodologies, using different methodologies or more than one would require more time or less time to answer those. So that is also something that we need alignment from the project team as well. And that connects with the project plan. So all these sections, they are very connected. But again, the study goals is really, I would say, are the most important ones because this is where we're gonna scope what are the main questions we're gonna answer and make sure that these would answer not only user needs, but also it would address business needs as well among those conversations. But when it comes to, would you approach a plan differently if you're seeking approval versus team consensus, just organizing your thoughts? Interesting question. I don't think I would a different approach. I think the questions, study questions, they fall under those specific categories. Seeking approval, that's very interesting because it just participated in a study that had this seek approval for a specific design solution they had, and I was providing the bad news, if that makes sense, that the project imposes a lot of risks. So, but still, I had the same kind of taxonomy that I used in my research, which was understanding what our users needed. And then I showed them our users maybe don't need that specifically. Maybe they need something else. So I would do the same one. But thank you for the question, Bill.
On the topic of study plans, and this isn't from the 80s, it's from the 2010s, but I'll put in the chat, there's a pretty good book called It's Our Research by Tomer Sharon, and he covers a similar perspective, Livia, as yours. And I would encourage that, this is an older book now, it's obviously pre-COVID, and the world is different, but still very much worth reading. All right, I want to thank our presenters, and I'm going to try something risky. I'm going to start clicking this button for every attendee that says allow to talk. So if you would like to, since we're not getting a lot of chat in the written chat, if you'd like to unmute yourself and say something verbally, please do.
Yeah, maybe I'll just kick things off on the study goal front. So one is sort of inspired by Bill's comment. So like we try in the crafting of the study goals, we try, we adapt it to the project context. And one context is sometimes the team needs to make a decision. So sometimes what we do in a study goal is we actually bake that decision right into the study goal. We say, we're going to look for this thing. If we find A, the team has agreed to do such and such. If we find B, the team has agreed to do some other thing. And that's one way. I mean, people do often say, oh, people, they didn't really listen to our results. They just, because it didn't match what they wanted or whatever. So if we sense that sort of a risk or dynamic, which is not very often, but when it is, we sort of hold people's feet to the fire, say, before we do this, are you committed to sort of doing these things? And it gets the team talking among themselves. Are we, if the results are such and such, are we really going to do this thing or not? And so we get all that sort of alignment out up front. So when the results come in, it's sort of fairly well established what's expected to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. It almost relates to sort of your what's the word I'm looking for? Consensus building or negotiation techniques where up front, before you start the negotiation, you want to ask the other party, is there anything that I can say or any evidence I can provide that will get you to make a decision? Because if the answer is no, then we're not,
Yeah.
why are we doing research? Like,
Right, yeah.
or why are we having this negotiation if there's absolutely nothing I can say that will change your mind?
Right.
I saw Kate had said she might have been having some trouble with actually unmuting herself. So I don't know. Somebody else try. Try to unmute yourself. Say something. Prove you exist and you're not just a disembodied AI.
Is it working now?
There we
Yay.
go. Hello.
Hello. I'm sorry about that. It was like this weird, very ear piercing feedback I got and
Ooh,
then couldn't
sorry.
get off mute. So I apologize if there was someone who asked a question or wanted to talk with me.
Oh, from our perspective, we had no problems, but welcome to the voice chat. I cannot actually push a button at this point and let people turn on their video, so the best I can do is have disembodied voices.
Oh, better than silence.
Kate and I had an interesting discussion the other day about maturity of organizations. I really like, Livia, your structured approach to research. I think that would sort of encourage a level of maturity in any organization of we're not just going out and randomly asking questions or randomly doing usability tests, but there's a goal, there's a structure, and particularly one of your latter slides are saying maybe we go from understand to evaluate, or maybe we go from evaluate to compare. What are we actually trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, and actually, this is a framework that Paul and we presented to within our organization in this attempt of advocating for UX research to make the teams understand that we can evaluate designs, but we can also compare designs and we can also understand users. So there are different approaches that our department can serve for the different teams. So we always usually use that framework to kind of in this advocacy attempt for UX research.
What's the cliche? If you don't have a destination in mind, then any path will work. So yeah, let's have a destination in mind, and then that will help us decide what path to take to get there.
Yeah. That's a great point. Just to build on that. So yeah, I mean, often people don't have a sense of the full range of things we can do. They think we just do this one thing, and then if we use this as sort of a menu of things we can do, then it opens the eyes. Oh, we can do these other things. The other way reason is helpful is sometimes people are very vague, at least in their wording of what they want. So put that in front of them, say, like, which of these do you want? Do you have, like, it's unclear, like, do you have one design? Do you have more than one design? Do you have no designs? Like, what? They might use the same words. We want feedback on this thing we're doing. Say, well, there's their design. There's no design yet. Or we have five different options or whatever. So just that gets people sort of, at least an initial thing, get a sense of like, what kind of thing are we talking about here? And then we can ask probe details that are relevant for that kind of thing.
Exactly. We could probably do a whole talk on that back and forth conversation and sort of eliciting more specificity from our stakeholders. Kate, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you just got me thinking, Joshua, too, like Livia going through kind of the mechanics of the approach that you shared. I was thinking about it from like a more literal perspective of like, yeah, this is such a good approach to use and a way to structure thoughts and actions and those kind of things. But then when you were talking, Joshua, too, is interesting, just talking about maturity and placing value on things. I think that there's something to unpack there. Like, it's very hard for the human mind to assign value to something. Like there's no absolute, right? It's all relative, and without not understanding, because I hate that. It's like you have to know everything. Without like having the transparency into the inputs of research to be able to assign value, I think that makes it difficult for business customers and stakeholders. And that's why sometimes it gets diminished and kind of marginalized. So I think there's a lot of merit without like pushing it in their faces of like, here's everything we have to do, but just like making them aware, letting them know we're here, right? And this is the rigor and the approach to things so that they can have some fodder to be able to establish value to it as well. So I was just thinking about it that way based on some of the things you said, Joshua, which is interesting.
That's an excellent point, actually. I haven't thought about that. Having that structure showing how we can provide value for different situations, different projects, and showing how we follow that, right? That's great.
I'm thinking out loud. This is not a fully baked thought, but since I was just with my software development team, doing our iteration planning this morning, and we talk about how does this epic break down into user stories, and each one gets a point value on it, which is supposed to represent, complexity of effort. We could almost do the same thing with UX research. So, you want to compare one design to another, that's less effort than comparing 5 designs among themselves. So we might be able to provide, the requester with, I'm always reluctant to give a timeline, but at least I could say, this is harder work than this other thing, or this is, roughly 5 times as much work as this other thing, to let them understand that, yeah, there is value in what we do in the same way that there's value in what your software engineering team does.
Maybe I'll just make another observation of this approach. So like you probably noticed, we're using very simple kind of lay terminology like understand, compare, evaluate, as opposed to more sort of jargony sort of thing. So we're like we're doing that with our audience in mind to make it very sort of relatable to them. No, I can understand that, and I can imagine what it means, and I can see how it how I can get value from that.
Right. You avoided the jargon of, generative, formative, evaluative, and summative, and people's eyes are glazing over, which I think is
That's right.
super smart. Know your audience and speak the language of your audience.
Yeah, and it's also, we said, and I guess I don't know if it's in this presentation, but we frame it at, here's what we can do for you. We can help you improve your understanding. We can help you compare designs. It's things that they want to do. It's not how we do it. It's just,
right.
We can do these things for you. We can tell you what people think about your design.
Right.
And
all right. I see people are dropping off. Likely it's after lunch. I myself have a meeting to go to. Since there's not exactly a giant storm of conversation, I'm going to say we can draw this to an end. Thank you so much, Paul and Livia. This is super great, both method of presentation with the 15-minute mixtape or mixtapes, and also the content was fantastic as well. And we're getting some praise in the chat. So thanks again. And for those wondering, yes, this is recorded, and yes, it will be on the UXPA International website in about a week. That's probably the #1 question we get.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.